Hey people, I watched the Ten Commandments last night and I caught a couple things. It was in the Pharaoh's words. You know, when he's making a covenant, he says, let it be writ and let it be so. You know, a covenant to be writ. And so that might be another pronunciation for this when I read this as in writ. And it's the same thing, but be writ and let it be writ and let it be so. This is now law, ever binding, carve it in stone. And maybe I'll remember the second thing I caught, but it was all when the Egyptians were speaking that I caught some words in there. So I was wanting to read this 2 Kings 11:15. This is the last place where I saw the American, and said the priest's American. And I'm going to look at it here first, but I got it pulled off and put beside the Latin, and it's going to show off a bunch in the Latin. But this is me here. This is, and I found myself, I say a lot. And I know when I clip the movies, if I see it where I said it and it's wide open, I clip it out so you don't hear it all the time I say it. But I know you hear it, But yeah, this is you yada, And they'll say this means Lord knows. Jehovah knows, oh Lord knows. But this is when I'm calling you the Lord, And the reason Jehovah was the priest is because the Khan. And the Khan is the senators. When you're reading it with this mark here, this next word reads backwards. The senators. The senators is an ancient Egyptian word that means they're just a bunch of pawns. They might have good intentions when they try to get elected, but they learn real quick that they have handlers. It comes from this ancient Egyptian word, the Senate men. Senetmn, the Senate men. And the Senate men, these are all these pawns up here that the king is playing with. And if you saw the Ten Commandments last night, Nefertiti, that was the woman that Moses was loving, and she ended up marrying the Pharaoh. She was the daughter of the king, and whoever married her was going to be the king. These are the handlers, the ones moving this Senate. And this word for commanded, I just caught this, and a lot of times I should say I believe, but believe means the bitch leave, the sacrifice to the Lord, and I don't like to say that. But this X, this tells me it says which, W-I-X, but not just which. If the Hebrew's speaking, it's spelt with an H. But this lets you know that this is a command from the Romans. The Romans spell their which with the X. You see it in the Greek. And so it's just a subtle clue, and you see the subtle clues and different spellings throughout, and it lets you know, who's speaking. And there I go again, And you see they read this Vav here as a W here. But you look here and it's put that V as a W, and it's W-I-T-Z and A-V, wits of. And it means which of, wits of. You hear country people, W-I-T-S for which, and wits of. And wits of, the senators, and remote. And so this is where your word removed comes from. You'll see hundreds in here many times, and they'll spell it. It always comes up in these parentheses because it's spelled different in two different Bibles. I believe that's because they weren't too sure how to read this. But this is the only time it's spelt like this. The rest of the time, you'll see the A and the I switch places. Comes up again here in 9. The A and the I switch places. And again in 4, the A and the I switch places. And you see a bunch of words in here in parentheses. And what it means is it was coming from two different Bibles. And they weren't too sure how to read this. So they put both spellings in of all these words. And so I always read the first one in the square parentheses. But you see the reason why it's spelled different here. There's this mark here that has you read this backwards. And so what it does, the A and the I switch places. So in this direction, this IA reads a U when you're reading it through this way. And then as you hit this line, you read this backwards, VA turns into the TE, the TH, or the TE. And so when I read it with this mark that tells me to read the next word backwards and forwards, I read the A words head on. And then when I read it with the A words backwards, I just read these straight through. I ignore this mark. It's either one or the other. And so the con is the senators. And which of you know the senators? And then EMIA reads a U and a VT. Removed, remote. Remote and removed is the same word. You see it here, Middle English remote, from the old French remote, Latin, meaning to remove, the remover. And which of you know the senators? Removed. And then this mark would be here. You don't read this. And so backwards, the double T becomes an I. And then the VA reads as a TE or a TH. And so it's a it. And remove it, him, her, stance. STANECE. And removed it, him, her stance. And Audi, as he should. And Audi, and WHY, Audi, Y. He should, Y, what's of. And then you come down and read it here. And the picked, the officers were PQDI picked. And the picked the chill. And that's another clue. This is the Roman army is the chill. The commander of 1,000s is the chiliarch. And it's where your word kill comes from. The H is the CHIL. And picked the chill. And this is where the word command comes from. The IA reading is a U. And this is in Homer. Homer is a command. And Homer Alium. And so to them, you'll see it spelled correctly in this chapter often. It's just a L is a to, and an EM is them. The E is the, THEM, them. But this is not to them, but this is Ali, high, them. And picked the chill, a command, high them. Or the chill of VUM, a German word for from, a rally them, to bring them together. And evicts, and not take outside, but kicked out. That's the same word used when it says, and I brought you out of the land of Egypt. No, you were evicted. That whole story of the Ten Commandments is a big old crock. They got it turned around backwards. These are people that weren't wanted, and they were the rulers. They weren't the slaves. They kicked the rulers out. And evicts. And then the IA reading is a VAV, and the VAV A reading is a TE, and it's evicts what it, the all, and backwards, the tie-in from in it. And L, to consider it. And this is where your word consider comes from, SDRT. And to consider means to look at, to think about it, to look deep into it, to consider it. And to tie in from in it, to consider it. And whosoever follows her, this reads as a BI or VIA. This is via. And you'll see it often, this word will come up and they'll say to go, to enter. And it's via, by way of. And we, by way of, hear ye, emit, to put out. In, share in. And, this is the Roman word for the hand, the share. What's in the hand, in. Is the way they get them out. It's on the tip of a sword. They weren't escaping. They were being evicted in sharing. And for American, the ultimatum would emit in it, Jew. And you see this reads different ways. When you're reading it with the A words backwards. This is a no. The A following the L becomes an N. And this is more of, he said, and it's a CIRM, a sermon, a serm. And then the A-E reading is the ES. The serm is cannot, and you see this in the Ten Commandments, the L-A, it'll read the other way. And they'll either be followed by a T or end with a T. And so when it's read with a L-A, you never read it backwards, and it's always no. And then you'll often see this mark in the Ten Commandments, and so it's a not, either way you read it. Not omit, and to not let in, or to not moot, to kill them, omit. And spoke God all the words these, no more. No more of this. And you see here, no shall have you gods other before me, is no ye a jealous. Know ye I'm a jealous God. And then not you shall make, an N-O-T, not, and O-S-E, that's the base word they say is make, and everything comes around that, and not O's, and a not statue, and a not a bid, not serve them, not a bid. And here, it's a no trash. Don't be trashing. And no, and not nap. Don't be sleeping around. And a not, and not nab. And again, in the bear false witness, in N-O-T, and not one. And that's a not one broke had suffer. And that means, after you done broke that slave, after you done broke that horse, you've got to feed it. You don't torture it. Once he's broke, and not had suffer. And so this wasn't commandments to the slaves. These are commandments to the kings. And again, and not comed in it. And so when you're reading it with the marks, you're reading the A words head on, and you're reading these backwards. And it's a com, I-A ring is a U. A comer, the con, altum, to change them. The altum, what omit, like omit, and do let her be killed. And the change them, what omit. The altum, what omit in it, Jew. But when you're reading it without this mark, these A words are reading backwards, and that's the serm. The serm is, the AE ring is the ES, is con. And that's what you go to church on Sunday to listen to. The serm is con, and said the priest. The serm is con. And no dumped, T-U-M-T, dumped. Do let her be killed. No, that's just after you kill her, you dumped them. The dumped in it, Jew. So to consider it, that's when somebody has a sword poked at your stomach, and you better think about it, you can leave or you can take the sword. You better consider it. But I put up alongside the Latin, and after I figured both of these out, then I went to read the Greek, and it come a whole lot easier. But you see here the 100, the precipitate. This is what raises up at the top of your still. This is what's distilled. This is the good stuff that goes up to the top. The priest, the head of it. Should them yo yada. Joe knows a cent. This is the hundreds, is a cent. And you can see it over here in which of the cent. When you're reading this with the A words backwards, this is C-E-N-T. The cent has removed. And so the cent, is the century, the guards. But it's also that period of 100 years. The century on of us. And precipitate, and the head, the cream, what was raised to the top. Should them, the century on of us. And so that's the Hebrews. Hebrew meaning the astrologers. And whereon, the QU, I just replace it with the W, and it fits often. And you can see here's where they're getting this where from. And where on it. And where on it super over and exercitum. And that's where we're getting the host from. And here's this precips, before headed. Before means the one in the front, the top head. And the exercitum, they say that this is a disciplined body of men. But it's coming from the exercise. It means the one controlling them. The exercite them. At work, practice, exercise. And precipit in the forehead, should them, ought them, the century on of us, where on it over exercitum, the one over the exercise, the host. And this et, you just read it as a vav, same as this vav over here, the key in the Greek, and it's a W-A-I-T, await his. And so await his means it's your turn to speak. And that's where they get this and said unto them from. They'll say this is and said and unto them his. But it's await his. It came his turn to speak. And educite him extra. And this is where the word educate comes from. Brought up, reared, educated, trained. The base word edco, bring up to educate. And wait, that's coming from the old German to watch. Is in you lying in wait to ambush somebody. Waiting your turn. And wait his educite. And I am, the double E, I am. And extra. And extra is where they're getting this without. And what it means is if, you're pouring rice in a bowl and it fills all the way up, everything without of the bowl is extra. Everything on the side, it's not in. More than the count. And septa templi. And so septa is cut off, and with the extra is cut off from the temple. They wouldn't fit in the temple. And it's talking about the women, not allowed in the temple. And the temple doesn't necessarily mean a court, a house, something like that. It comes from the ancient word meaning the place of worship and having nothing to do with a building. The templum. And it was only to the Greek when they made a sacred enclosure. And the Old Norse, when you're having a ceremony on the boat, you go up to the bow, to have the blue nose ceremony. You're up on the bow of the ship. An open space for an all-girl of prophetic observation. Open, clear, broad space. And the et vav, and a qui cum q. This is in who come, it's time. It's q, it's time. Q, something to tell it when it's time to move. And who come q, and I am. And that's where they're getting this, the Lord here, that you don't see up here. And who come q I am. So this Lord isn't a Lord or God. It's a Lord, a human that's over. And who weren't, QI, who weren't, the one who is, over, and weren't over, exercitum, await his, the educite, I am extra. And septa templi, and cut off from the worship place. And who come Q, and who come its mark, its time, I am secatus furit. And this secatus, that's where they're getting this follow from. And this furit is where they're getting this whosoever. It's where you word a non-sequitur. It doesn't follow. It doesn't follow what we're talking about. That's a non-sequitur. And so sequitur is to follow. And they say furit just means to be. And furitur gladio, this is the gladio is where they're getting the sword from. In him to be slain, that's a little much. That's to pierce or strike, beat, thrash. And gladius, meaning sword, swordsman. And you can see how they separate a Q cum, a Y cum Q A Q is how or who, which or that. But I believe that's same as Y, W-Y, same as in the Hebrew, meaning how or who, how things get done. And cum Q, meaning it's time. And secutus furit, and followeth, and whosoever her, and to thrash with the sword. And dixerit, to command at, a dix, the dictator. And dixerit, and command in the sacerdos, the sacred ones, the priests, the Americans, and command it in the sacred O's, yo sacred O's, and none asiditer, aside death. You see the same word in the Hebrew on the side of the road, left aside, suicide, death, and none aside it where, none to die it where, in temple a domining, in the temple of a domini, dominant. And so this isn't a word meaning Lord is in God, but this is the dominant human, dominatus, absolute power, the ruler, the domain. My last movie, the Covenant of the Hairy Smutty Balls, I was saying that I was infringing on YouTube's domain here. They only show one like, and this is my like. You see it's bright white here. And I wasn't sure about how come nobody was liking this. And so I went to a couple of different of my channels to put a like on it. It only shows that one in all of them. And Lucky says I've been blackballed. And I told her, I don't think YouTube is liking this. They're refusing to show the likes. I only see one, and I liked it twice myself. So I noticed that. I liked it too also. So that's at least 4 likes on there. But that's what I said. When I noticed no likes, I went to 3 different channels, but each one shows only itself. Still looking at 1 like. I'm not trying to tell nobody how to think. I'm just trying to assist the thinking process. But that infringes on their domain, the dominant. They are Lord of assisting you to think, and they try to be the ones who tell you what to think, and they don't want nobody else infringing on their domain. And so they're loving that artificial intelligence. It used to be a lot more difficult for them to watch out what movies to keep down, but now artificial intelligence takes care of all that for them. But that's what that means, that word. It comes from the house ruler, dominant. Over here in the Hebrew, that's the house Jew. And all dumped in it Jew. And I'm going to cut this off here, and I'm going to read on down to see what it's talking about here when it's talking about the cannibals. The priest of Baal is the cannibal, and within the cannibal. See if I can figure out what it's talking about here and put your movie up on that. But just know, that the priest is the con man. The con. Whoever's got the con, that's the one who's controlling the ship. You might be holding the wheel and operating the engines, but the officer in charge, he's called officer of the con. He's controlling what's going on. He don't have to get his hands dirty. All he has to do is spit out orders. The con picked what. And I can see already it's talking about, why, fucketeers. Fucketeers, like the buccaneers, the ones assisting, and the fucketeers is the captains that's fucking you. So, I love America. America's great, but the ancient word American, it doesn't mean what we think it means today. The American all dumped in it you. It was the rulers of Egypt that got evicted. And Trump doesn't know this, He doesn't have handlers. He doesn't understand how long that these people have been controlling things. The handlers behind the scene, you don't see their face. They have all the money, and they operate the senators. And so hopefully he disrupts the way the money system's going on now and gets something in place to control the handlers so the senators can look out for us. And it's not just us, them handlers, they control the whole world. They're trying to disrupt the whole world by dumping the Muslims on everybody. It's time for the reset, and they're trying to create a civil war in all the countries that's been rejecting this. And the reason they want Islam, Muslim, the word comes from submission, submissive. They just whatever the man tells them, you submit. They want total submission. They don't want anybody questioning their authority. And I'm going to cut this off here. Good day.